kind of an introduction to organic chemistry. Which is the chemistry of carbon. The reason that an understanding, a very, very superficial understanding of organic chemistry is necessary, the reason an understanding of the chemistry of carbon is necessary is because biochemistry is a branch of. In other words, biological molecules are carbon-based. So any of the biological molecules from Wednesday, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, the other hydrophobic molecules, nucleic acids, any of those biological molecules are carbon-based molecules. Life is carbon-based, whether it be you, your dog, a mosquito, or a tree in the front yard. The big deal with the chemistry of carbon, if we go to the periodic table and we take a look at carbon, carbon has 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. If we draw a good old-fashioned electron configuration, I guess, of carbon, we'll do that first. Thinking about the octet rule, 2 of carbon's electrons are in the first energy level. So if we put 2 in the first energy level, that leaves 4. How many electrons does the second energy level need to be satisfied? Full. Needs 8. Needs 8. Well, we've got a total of 6. We've put 2 in the first. Remember, the octet rule is 2, 8, 8. So we only have 4. And whatever we do with them, 2 pairs, we could do that. Well, that's not happy. That's not stable. That's not 8. It's 4. We arrange them a little differently. Still doesn't fix the problem. There are only 4 there. We need 8. So every carbon atom has to form 4 bonds. We look at a Lewis structure of carbon. Remember, with Lewis dot structures, you show only the valence electrons. So a Lewis dot structure is just showing the 4 that are in the outer energy level. Well, again, we can see that it's not stable like that. And so the bottom line is every carbon atom has to form 4 bonds. Has to form 4 bonds. Now, a carbon can bond to lots of things, including itself. In fact, it loves to bond to itself. It's what sand is. It's what diamond is. It's what graphite is. But because every carbon atom has to form 4 bonds, and because life is carbon-based, it's something called a carbon skeleton. That is responsible in many cases for the shape of biological molecules, the 3-dimensionality. Now you have to remember, and when you look at pictures like this, things are three-dimensional. It's just like when we look at cells. We destroy our children in second grade or so when we first introduce cells. We say the cell is the simplest unit of life. There's this thing in the middle called the nucleus. It's kind of like your brain. So the children come home from school and they picture cells as frisbees or plates. Well, if we simply take the time to show them the model that's in the cabinet in the room, but the teacher never bothers to get it out, and it's a spherical model like a basketball or a globe that you can see through, and there is a nucleus suspended in the middle along with a lot of other structures, then the children would grow up with this mental image of cells as three-dimensional structures. Of course, if they're plant cells, they tend to be squarish, rectangular, things like that, not spherical. But nevertheless, we have to get away from that two-dimensional idea. So these four bonds are not just top, bottom, left, and right. They project through the plane of the board into the room next door. Okay, it's a three-dimensional thing. So when we talk about the carbon skeleton, it's not just left, right, up, down. It's the third dimension as well. I said carbon loves to bond to itself. With that in mind, you can have long chains of carbon. The only rule really is that every carbon has four bonds. So we can have a branch here. Have a branch here. Pretty much anything. Sky's the limit. Again, the carbon skeleton, shape, three-dimensionality. So the very simplest organic molecules are the hydrocarbons. Now, as I mentioned on Wednesday, historically, I considered hydrocarbons prerequisite material, just like functional groups. And one of the TAs told me that in their biology class, hydrocarbons weren't covered. So I said, oh, and I asked a bunch of students, and it seemed to be sort of a 50-50 mix. But so I left the hydrocarbons in the document called prerequisite material, but I also moved them to the actual lecture notes. So whether it's prerequisite material for you or new material, it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about it. So these are the simplest organic molecules. As the name implies, they contain only hydrogen and carbon. Now, these molecules by themselves have no function in people unless you're out in the garage drinking gasoline to try to kill yourself. These are fossil fuels. These are dead, rotten, decayed dinosaurs. These are the things that we drill into the ground to find, to make oil, gasoline, propane, butane. And they contain nothing but carbon and hydrogen. So why talk about them? Well, we talk about them because we learn several ways, several types of abbreviations that we use for molecules. We also learn some terminology. We also learn some information about shape. So we'll look at the first probably 8 hydrocarbons, and you can kind of think of it as counting 1 through 8. And as we go 1, 2, 3, what's happening is we're going from 1 carbon to 2 carbons to 3 carbons. I said we'll go up to about 8. Now, they are hydrocarbons, and so on these other bonds, that's what we have is hydrogen. Nothing else can be there. You don't have to wonder what's there. Hydrogen's there. Something has to be there. We know that because if we go back to the Lewis structure showing the valence electrons, we have 4 unpaired electrons in the second energy level, and that just doesn't work. So we can show that another way. We can show it like that. Well, to pair up those electrons, we use hydrogen. If you look at the periodic table, every hydrogen has 1 electron. So when we take something like that and we attach the hydrogens, what's really happening is each of these little bars, which as you know is a covalent bond, is formed from one carbon electron and one hydrogen electron. So we have the 4 carbon electrons. Each hydrogen is contributing its electron. That gives carbon a valence of 8 in its second energy level, which satisfies the octet rule. Everybody's happy. It also gives hydrogen a valence of 2. Remember, 2, 8, 8, the octet rule. So carbon has 8 because it's sharing with hydrogen, and each hydrogen has 2 because it's sharing with carbon. And of course, that's what covalent bonds are all about, is electron sharing. So this simplest organic molecule is one carbon atom, and its name is methane, and we can also show it as CH4. Methane is a gas. It's known as swamp gas. Animals, including cows and humans, release it. It's flammable. It's found in mines. So the second molecule would have 2 carbons. And if we have 2 carbons, one bond of each carbon is used to hold the 2 carbons together. So that means that each carbon has 3 hydrogens rather than 4. We could show this as CH3, CH3. You might be inclined to call it C2H6, but that'll get you in trouble, so don't. And this one is called ethane. The 3 carbon molecule sort of changes, grows a little bit. Could be shown as CH3, CH2, CH3. And that one's called propane. And you might want to call it C3H8, but don't. And we'll see the problem with the 2 that I've crossed out in red when we go to the next example. Now, propane is that gas that's in the tank that you might have on your deck or your patio that powers a grill, or if you have an RV, it has a propane tank or tanks. So the next one is butane. So 4 carbons, making sure that every carbon has 4 bonds. Notice that in any of these, the carbons on the end have 3 hydrogens because the carbon on the end has only 1 carbon-carbon bond. But any carbon in the middle has only 2 hydrogens because the carbon in the middle has 2 carbon-carbon bonds, 1 on each side. You could show this one as C4H10, but you don't want to do that. You could show it as CH3, CH2, CH2, CH3. And there is a way to shorten this a little bit. CH3, open parentheses, CH2 subscript 2, CH3. So this shows us that there are 2 CH2s in the middle. And so as they get longer and longer and longer, you just change this from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. But here's why you don't want to do what I've shown crossed out in red. Because if you have 4 carbons and 10 hydrogens, they might be arranged like that. But they might not. They might be arranged like that. If you don't believe me, count them. They're both C4H10. But this one is a dog, and this one is a cat. They're that different. Extremely different molecules. So when we say C4H10, we don't know what we have. And the longer they get, you imagine a 10-carbon chain. How many ways could you assemble that? This one is called isobutane, or 2-methylpropane. And again, they are very, very different molecules. The first abbreviation I'll introduce is I'm tired of drawing the hydrogens, so I'm no longer going to put them in the picture. You're free to put them in your picture. Your pictures are your pictures. But my pictures are mine, and I'm tired of drawing them. We know they're there, don't we? How do we know they're there? Every carbon has to have 4 bonds. How do we know that something like nitrogen isn't there, or oxygen?
It's been much more complicated beyond that.
Okay, but simpler.
Hydrogen's the only one with one.
What are we talking about?
Hydrogen's the only one.
Hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
There can't be anything there but carbon and hydrogen. And as this gentleman said, yeah, if there was an oxygen there, there'd have to be something attached to oxygen. Periodic table, check it out. Oxygen has 8 electrons. 2 in the first leaves 6. 6 isn't 8. I don't know if I named that one. The standard 4-carbon molecule is butane. That's the material in the disposable lighters that people buy. All right, the 5th carbon, or the 5-carbon molecule, is called pentane. Now you recognize part of that word. In other words, you know a pentagon is a 5-sided figure, just as a hexagon is a 6-sided figure. So pentane looks like that. It's CH3 with 3 CH2s in the middle. I'm going to, right over there, introduce another abbreviation that we use a lot in biological chemistry. But before I just throw it on the board and have you say, what? I want to remind you, and I know I don't have to because everything to do with cell structure and function is on the prerequisite material, so you either came to me knowledgeable of that or you have reviewed it. We've been here now, we're starting the 4th week, so at this point I know everybody's reviewed cell structure and function on an as-needed basis. But remember, guys, if we blow up that cell membrane, it's a phospholipid bilayer, right? And how do we draw those phospholipids? A little circle with 2 squiggly lines. And we use the 2 squiggly lines, well, and of course this means the inner portion of the membrane. say here is hydrophilic because of the phosphate groups. The outer portion of the membrane is also hydrophilic because of the phosphate groups. The core of the membrane is fatty because of the hydrocarbon chains. Bilayer of phospholipids. What's a phospholipid? It's a diglyceride with a phosphate group on carbon 3. Lipids are made of, you might want to look at the chart, they're made of glycerol and fatty acids. What does a fatty acid look like? It has a carboxyl group and a hydrocarbon chain. So how do we get from this hydrocarbon chain to these squiggly lines? It's because the bond angles between these carbon atoms are such that the carbon chain is zigzagged. It's not a straight line. And so we might go from this to that. And then we say, I'm tired of drawing the carbons, I'm tired of drawing the dots. And then we say, I'm tired of making it so neat and pretty. We just use a squiggly line. Every teacher you had, I don't care if it was high school, middle school, college, when you studied cell structure and function, this is exactly how they diagrammed hydrocarbons, including your textbook. And the basis of the squiggly lines come from the zigzag line, which comes from the zigzag line with the dots, where every dot is carbon, which comes from the carbon chain shown in zigzag formation, because carbon can't make a straight line. With that in mind, this does not look like that. And I find drawing the dots wasteful. So there we go. That's pentane. Again, hydrocarbons in and of themselves have no function in people unless you're in the garage drinking gasoline to try to kill yourself. We talk about them because they introduce some abbreviations, some shorthand notations, some terminology, and some very, very valuable information about shape. Pentane does something else. It forms a ring. Draw it this way once. Just as with anything else we've looked at, every carbon has to have 4 bonds. Show it like that. But either way is a waste of time. All you have to do is draw a pentagon. Now it's not pentane. It's a different animal. It's cyclopentane. It's just something else that can happen with 5 carbons in the world of hydrocarbons. And you don't have to guess what's at this corner. The only thing allowed to be there is carbon. If it's not carbon, you have to show it. So if, for example, it was oxygen, you would put the oxygen in the picture. So what is at this corner? And how many hydrogens?
2.
Are there any hydrogens connected to that oxygen?
No,
No. And how do we know that?
because it satisfies the atomic.
It's that, exactly. Again, oxygen has 8 electrons. Put 2 of those in the first. That leaves 6 valence electrons. 6 plus the 2 bonds we see gives us 8. What if that red dot was not carbon, was not oxygen, but was nitrogen? Now, does it have any hydrogens? One? How do we know it has one? Periodic table. Nitrogen, valence of 7. I'm sorry, not valence of 7, valence of 5. We've got a total of 7. Minus 2 in the first leaves 5. If we have 5 valence, we need 3 more to have 8. There's 1, 2. So this would be the third. But we don't have to put it there. It's got to be there. Just like we don't have to put the hydrogens here. Why do it? It's a waste of time. But how do we know? Because the only thing allowed to be at a dot, if it's not shown, is carbon. And no matter what's there, whether it be carbon or whether it be something that's not carbon and therefore it's shown, it has to have a satisfied valence. It has to meet the octet rule. So if some hydrogens are necessary, then they're shown. If they're not necessary, what if something's here that's not hydrogen? You'd have to show it. Because we're not guessing. There's no mind reading here. The rules are very, very simple. Pentane, pentagon. What does pent mean? Okay, and so pentane is a 5-carbon what? Hydrocarbon. Okay? Pent is 5, pentane, 5-carbon hydrocarbon, pentagon, 5-sided figure. Pentose. Ose is a sugar. So a pentose is a 5-carbon sugar. Write that down if you need to, because nobody in the room said 5-carbon sugar. Nobody in the room said 5-sided sugar. What did they say? 5-carbon sugar. When it's 5-sided, it is a pentagon. The 6-carbon molecule is called hexane. So what is hex? Hexane is a 6-carbon hydrocarbon. What does hexagon mean? 6-sided what? Figure. Yeah, shape. 6-sided shape, 6-sided figure. What does hexose mean? 6-carbon sugar. It does not mean 6-sided sugar. Just like this does not mean 5-sided sugar. Just as when we were discussing terminology, it's not difficult, but it's picky. Is, maybe it won't be so offensive if I do it this way. Is this the medial digit on my hand or the median digit on my hand? It's median or intermediate. It's the one in the middle. Half of you are about to go upstairs and take a quiz. trust you knew the answer and just didn't want to look like a Mr. Miss Know-It-all, so you kept your silence. Remember that though? Median versus medial? It's not difficult, it's picky. Picky. Is this my brachial?
No, it's your
No. That ain't good English. What is this? Brachium or brachial region? Not difficult. It's like the mathless math is not difficult. Picky. Precise. That's why they call it science. So hexane could be shown as CH3 on each end, and how many CH2s are in the middle?
One.
Okay. I wanted to draw it out, which clearly I don't. It would look like that. But the better way to show it is like that. And it forms a ring. Let's do two things. I just put this back up here for visual purposes. It's already in your notes. So if hexane has 6 carbons and 14 hydrogens, and pentane has 5 carbons and 12 hydrogens. What about well, we can do it first. What about cyclohexane? It's C6. I mean, I can count them. But is it H14 also? Why is it not? You're correct, but why is it not?
Because the carbon at the top is connected by another carbon.
Okay,
So you lose
that
two.
works. Stated differently, there are no terminal carbons. See here, we have 2 CH3s. We don't have a CH3 in the ring. So how many hydrogens are there? 10 or 12, I heard both. And then likewise with pentane versus cyclopentane. There are 5 carbons, I can see those, but how many hydrogens are there? Okay. Because every carbon is CH2. There's not a CH3, because as this gentleman said, the carbons are connected. Remember, the cyclic form, cyclopentane versus pentane, they're completely different atomals. I show you those just because it's something else that can happen with a 5-carbon hydrocarbon. I also show you those because I like to make the distinction between the words that start with hex or pent, pentane, hexane, pentagon, hexagon, pentos, hexose. In this whole business of, you've already written this down as well, but a hexose is a 6-carbon sugar. It is not necessarily a 6-sided sugar. And so, for example, that represents glucose or galactose. They are 6 carbon sugars. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice that when there's something other than carbon in the ring, it's shown. So that 6 carbon sugar has 6 sides. But let me show you another 6 carbon sugar. Six carbons, 4 of them are in the ring, 2 of them are not in the ring. It's a hexose, it's a 6 carbon sugar, but geometrically, what is it? Pentagon. So these words, they're not difficult, but they're kind of picky. I think looking at the hydrocarbons eases the transition into biological chemistry. All right, 2 more just for the sake of completeness. Heptane and octane. Draw those if you want, I'm not going to. Okay, our first group of biological molecules are the carbohydrates. First thing the notes mention about carbs, functions. The most important function of carbohydrates is energy. In fact, our most important source of energy is carbohydrates. Most of our energy should come from carbohydrates. Unfortunately, in the United States of America, for a lot of people, most of their energy comes from lipids. And that leads to dire consequences. Anyone know anything about the incidence of, let's see, what would be sad to talk about? Childhood obesity. Is that an issue in the United States? Huge issue. Most of our energy should come from carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are our most important source of energy. Now let me just throw this out there. When I diss on things, I'm not being critical of you or anybody else. Guess what I live on? Bacon. I will quite literally, okay, I buy my bacon at Sam's. It comes in 2 packages, shrink wrapped together, and each package is 2 pounds. And when I get the munchies, no, not because I'm stoned, I get the munchies, I will literally cook the 2-pound package of bacon and toast 6 to 8 slices of bread and use maybe a half a pound of Swiss cheese and eat the 3 to 4 sandwiches. And it might be 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night. Okay, I do this frequently. Okay, so no, I'm not healthy at all. I'm never saying I'm good, do what I do, you're all, no. America overall is a very unhealthy country. Again, childhood obesity, just Google that, if you want to. But what's the incidence of obesity? And of course you have the difference between overweight, obese, morbidly obese, and you can get into all that if you want to. But I'm talking about America as a culture. Not you or me or anybody else. I'm talking about me. I'm certainly unhealthy. Anyway, energy. There's another function that has to be mentioned. Carbohydrates form cell walls. It's redundant to say, but I'll say it for clarity. Sometimes when I say things that are redundant, I put them in parentheses. It's redundant to say, as you know, because animal cells don't have cell walls. Animal cells have cell membranes. If you look at a plant cell, in addition to the cell membrane, outside of the cell membrane, there's a cell wall. And again, that's just plant cells. The reason that this is worth mentioning is that cell walls are made of cellulose. There again, suffix. Cell walls are made of cellulose. And the significance of that is humans lack cellulase. Os is sugar, what's ACE? Enzyme. So we can digest cellulose by chewing it. We can mechanically digest cellulose, but we cannot chemically digest cellulose. In other words, guys, if you want to swallow your meat in big chunks, that's okay. You'll digest it down into amino acids and fat. The fat will be broken down into glycerol and fatty acids. The protein will be broken down into amino acids. But if you swallow your vegetable material whole, it will come out just as it went in. And if you don't believe me, go home and eat a few tablespoons of little corn niblets. Just buy a cheapest, smallest can of little yellow corn niblets you can buy. Don't cook them or anything, just eat them out of the can with a spoon. And monitor your waste, and you will see the corn just as it went in. Because we are incapable of digesting this without chewing it. So there's not a lot to say about carbohydrates functionally, but yet there's a lot to say about them. A huge amount to say about it. Energy, energy, energy. Most of our diet should be carbohydrates. Now when we talk about carbs, when we talk about our diet, we're talking about complex carbohydrates, not simple sugars. Simple sugars are the mono and diglycerides. That's not what's supposed to be the bulk of our diet. The other point to be made here the first word or words on the ingredients should be whole wheat or whole grain. Just because the bread is brown does not mean it's whole wheat. They dye it to fool you. I challenge you to make a promise to yourself for your well-being and that of your families. Your family being anybody that you currently shop for, cook for, prepare for, buy for, or any people in the future that you might shop for and feed. I challenge you to make a promise to yourself and these family members. Do not ever in your life buy anything without looking at the ingredients. And don't tell me that whole wheat bread costs more, because it doesn't. If it does, it's a matter of pennies. And don't tell me that brown pasta doesn't taste good. Buy it. Try it. If you don't like it, I'll reimburse you. No, I won't. But I'm serious, guys. This is huge. Again, look at the incidence of obesity in the United States. We can change it. Maybe I can change one person. Once a year, maybe I can change one person's life. Maybe you can change one person. The youngest people in the room, the ones who don't have children, you're the ones that can affect change. If you never give your child a piece of white bread, your child will not have this, oh my God, I know I'm supposed to eat brown bread, but I love white bread. How many people live in that world? Come on, be honest, raise your hands. A couple of you, okay, thank you for your honesty. Pick up your souvenir when you leave. But I'm serious, guys. The ones of you with the babies or don't have children yet, you're the ones who can make a change. That's the only way we're going to fix this epidemic. Spend some time Googling obesity and childhood obesity. Spend some time comparing cancer and heart disease in the United States versus other countries. It's horrible. It's a big, huge problem. A huge problem. And am I going to change the world? Well, of course not. But I've changed a couple of lives. I can think of one student, he and his wife both weighed over 400 pounds. His wife didn't take my class, he did. They both weigh under 200 pounds now. They've both climbed every 14er in the state of Colorado now. The young man got motivated in this class. And he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use the incline to get in shape. And the first day, he drove over, got out of his car, looked at the incline, said that's day one, got in his car and drove home. But that was a start. And he literally lost over 200 pounds, as did his wife. They both now climbed every 14er in the state of Colorado. Another young man walked up to me out in the rotunda. He said, I bet you don't recognize me. I said, no, I'm sorry, but I've had tens of thousands of students over the years. He said, I'm so-and-so. He said, I just wanted you to know. He said, do you know what was this weekend? And I said, yeah, if you're talking about running, the Collegiate Peaks. He said, yeah, I just ran the Collegiate Peaks 50-mile trail run. Really? He said, yeah, and I lost over 150 pounds. Started running. So, yeah, I've changed a handful of lives, and, am I proud of it? Of course I'm proud of it. And I hope to change one in this room. I don't pretend that I'm going to change the world or the college or the class. But if I can change one life, I'll be happy. And if you can each change one life, imagine what we could do with society in this country. Now again, guys, when we have these conversations, I'm not saying do as I do. I live on bacon, Red Bull, Corona, Coors Light, Southern Comfort. Not a healthy person. Functional groups found in carbohydrates. Well, I do exercise a lot. That's, I guess, the one good thing I have going for me health-wise. Hydroxyl groups. One less than the number of carbon atoms. One aldehyde or one carbonyl all right, so hydroxyl groups, one less than the number of carbon atoms, and one aldehyde or one carbonyl group. Carbonyl groups, sometimes people call them ketone groups. Never both. All right, so your hydroxyl groups, of course, are OH. Your aldehyde groups, carbon with a double bonded oxygen and a hydrogen. Carbonyl groups, carbon with a vacant bond or unpaired electron on each side and a double bonded carbon in the middle. The simplest carbohydrates are the monosaccharides. They're the simple sugars. The bad ones. These are the ones we get, off the table. Well, no, not off the table. That's actually a disaccharide, but we break table sugar down into monosaccharides. Table sugar is sucrose. And after we put it in our coffee or our tea or on our cereal, whatever we do with it, the cookies that we bake, we break it down into glucose and fructose, which are, of course, monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are always CH2O to the N. And what that shows us is that in monosaccharides, the number of carbon atoms and the number of oxygen atoms are equal, and there will be twice that many hydrogen atoms. So a typical sugar is C6H12O6. So in this typical sugar, N equals 6. This N equals 6. So we have 12 carbons and 12 oxygens, they're equal, and we have twice that many hydrogens. How could you classify this sugar? This sugar is a hexose. Does that mean it's a 6-sided sugar?
No.
It's a 6-carbon sugar. The examples or rather the common hexose sugars are glucose, galactose, and fructose. Now, if you take what's written down above this, how many hydroxyl groups does a sugar have?
One less than the number of carbons.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote it down, right? It's not, I said what's written up here, there's nothing up there, but you wrote it down. Exactly. How many hydroxyl groups? One less than the number of carbon atoms. Okay, so in this 6-carbon sugar, how many carbons are there?
6.
In this 6-carbon sugar, how many carbons are there?
6.
And biochemistry is a branch of organic chemistry, and organic chemistry is carbon-based. So these are carbon-based molecules. So you can bet it's gonna, maybe not in your body, but on paper, it's going to look like that. 6 carbons. How many oxygens? And how many hydroxyl groups? Because you wrote it down, guys. Look at your notes if you need to. There's one less hydroxyl group than the number of carbon atoms. So there's 5 of these, right? Well, where's the 6th oxygen going to come from? Look at what else you wrote down. After you wrote hydroxyl groups, one less than the number of carbon atoms, you wrote down we'll have either an aldehyde group or carbonyl group, not both. So the 6 oxygens, 5 of them come as hydroxyl groups. One of them comes from one of these groups. Well, if we put the hydroxyl groups here, in And then we could put this group up here. What's on these other bonds? Hydrogen. How many hydrogens do there have to be? 12. Count them. There's 12 there, if you remember to count the ones that I'm not drawing. So this hexose is an aldose. It's an aldose because it has the aldehyde group. So again, maybe you need to look at your notes, maybe you need to write it down if you didn't. But up above this in your notes, it says functional groups, hydroxyl groups, one less than the number of carbon atoms. The next line you wrote down would have said an aldehyde group or a carbonyl group, ketone in parentheses, because some people call carbonyl groups ketone groups, never both. So if we've got 6 oxygens, because we have 6 carbons, and there's 5 hydroxyl groups, accounting for 5 of our oxygens, our 6th oxygen has to come from whichever one of those groups the animal has. This isn't my way. The other possibility is to build the 6-carbon sugar with the carbonyl group instead of the aldehyde group. Now in the carbonyl group, as you can see here, and if you can't see that, I will enlarge it. The carbonyl group has 2 unpaired electrons. Something's got to connect to each side. So it's going to go in the middle of the molecule as opposed to on the end. So there's our carbonyl group. Color coding this blue, blue. I need 6 oxygens. I've got 1 right there, so the other 5 will go on the other 5 carbons. And all of these other bonds are hydrogen. This hexose is a ketose. And I could, as you do in medical terminology, combine words, biochemistry, physiological histology. I can combine these words, and you write it down here in your notes. I don't have room down there, so I'm just going to erase it. So on the left we have a hexaldose, on the right we have a hexketose. Now no one's asked, but I'd be willing to bet several people are wondering. So let me erase, I'll put it back exactly the way it is. It's not going to mess up your notes. No doubt, several people are wondering, how did he know to put that hydroxyl group on the right, the next one on the left, the next 2 on the right, and the last one on the left? I didn't know. I just made it up. Why? Because we're not going to memorize structures of specific molecules.